So I first really recognized that there was a need for leaders in the education space at a very young age, actually, in elementary school. So throughout my entire time in elementary school, I actually didn't have one teacher of color. When I went into middle school, the first two leaders of color and educational leaders of color that were in the space were my Spanish teachers. And to me, it always felt like there was something missing not having other educational leaders and teachers in our space that looked like me or maybe shared some of the same experiences as me. And so for me, it's always been in the back of my mind of how can I help others acclimate to environments where people might not look like them or people might not share the same experience. And so when I eventually transitioned into the nonprofit space at my organization Year Up, about a year ago, one of our new students had just started, and our student services director came over to me and said, you know, that student, this Black woman, the student really admires you. And I said, why? Like, I'd barely even spoken to the student, and they said they've never seen a woman, a Black woman in leadership, and to see someone like you in that space, that means a lot to her. And those are the moments where I realize that the work we do is so important and that there's still a tremendous need for leaders of color in education.
The community that Surge enables me to access has been the greatest gift. I think it stands out as what's been the most impactful, and I don't think I fully understood what I needed from Surge until I got there and felt so instantly connected to the other fellows in my cohort. You're joining a family, you're joining a movement, a larger effort that goes beyond the year that you're with Surge, and that Surge really is wanting to encourage people to think and dream and envision a different education system for young people and for leaders of color.
I first heard about Surge from my good friend Sarah Rizik-Bayer, who's a deputy director at Tandem Partners in Early Learning. She was part of the first cohort in Oakland. So she told me about her experience, and I had another couple of friends that were part of the first cohort. Bernadette Cermeño, who's a TK teacher, and Sonia Mehta.
I first heard about Surge through one of my Europe colleagues out of our Chicago office. And so when I moved to the Bay Area, she reached out and said, hey, there's this program called Surge that's in Chicago, and I'm thinking of doing it. And I just saw that they opened up an Oakland chapter, you should check it out. And so I did. I went to one of the meet and greets, had the opportunity to meet Michelle and Carmita and others, and said, yep, I'm gonna apply, this is it.
Sometimes we have these clear visions of what's possible for us, but only through our real strategic visioning and ability to see the possibility of our goal being achieved can we understand what it really means and how to get there.
So a day in the life of a Surge Fellow. We arrive at session at 7:30 in the morning, nice and early. For someone like me who's a morning person, I actually really enjoy that. And one of my favorite things about arriving to session is 7:30 in the morning, we are already squeezing each other and giving each other hugs and asking how we've been in the last month.
When you're in a space of all other leaders of color, some burden sort of just falls away. And I just hadn't felt myself be so authentic in such a long time.
I think the other thing about describing the fellowship is that the people that are coming to the sessions to lead, to talk, there will always be people that look like you and that are doing amazing work in education.
The last question I'm going to have for you is, what is success? We get stuck a lot of times in this field, and as people of color, particularly in this country, we get stuck on this negative future idea, this negative idea of the future. If the struggle continues, then when will we overcome? When do we win?
Nothing really beats like seeing the representation that we see imparting their wisdom and their knowledge and having the lens of a person of color and what this means within this broader conversation has been totally invaluable.
Later in the afternoon, we always engage in an activity called Soul Circle. This is an activity that is just the fellows. So there's no speakers, there's no Surge staff, there's just our immediate cohort of 11.
I guess it's coming from a place of understanding that to do this work, it goes far beyond simply having historical context and frameworks and knowledge and content knowledge. The real power of leaders of color, I think, can be in being really dialed into our own personal experiences and how we're kind of constantly engaged in a process of reflection so that we don't find ourselves perpetuating the systems.
El trabajo es real, el trabajo que uno hace del alma en Surge. A mí personalmente me ha servido mucho porque es un poco como pensarme en quién soy, pero también en referencia a otros. El trabajo ha sido duro en el sentido de que hay una cosa que me ha costado mucho trabajo aceptar e incluso asimilar, que ha sido algo que aquí le llaman anti-blackness.
So not simply looking at the experience of being oppressed, but also because we are all in this system of systemic oppression, how are we also complicit, or how are we also in positions where we are taking on the role of the oppressor, the agent?
That has been the most challenging but also painful to know and admit. I'm sorry if I get emotional. Mostly because I realized that to do my work with Black moms particularly, I need to be very aware of my own identity and being aware of my impact.
Double tension. At ease. Knee rest.
Attention! 2 times, 3 times, 4 times. Attention!
My biggest learn in my experience with Surge has been my work and my own intersectionality. We all have blind spots. We all have areas and opportunities for growth. And I want to put everything that I've learned in a very conscientious practice with my early childhood families and with my little ones.
The biggest lesson that I have taken away from my Surge journey so far is understanding the system of oppression that exists within our education system. I have had the opportunity through Surge to read many different articles that they've shared with us. And we've had many speakers who've come to us to help us understand how much structural racism still exists within our education system. And I am really grateful for the journey and the uncomfortable moments that I am taking in as I'm learning more about this history. And I also recognize I still have so much to learn. I stay motivated because of the young people I have the privilege of working with every day. They demonstrate so much grit and determination, and they are so brilliant.
If I were to describe Surge to a potential fellow, I would want them to know that it's a year-long learning fellowship about strengthening, developing, cultivating leaders of color in education who are committed to changing opportunities, changing the experiences that young people are having. And paired with that, I think, is the change that we want to see. We have to go get that. We have to go do that. And so I would want a fellow to know that there's something much more beyond the fellowship. What really begins is almost afterwards and kind of looking out for each other, which is what I see Surge also doing actively. Is like, we're looking out for you. We want you to be resourced. We want you to be networked and be able to turn to each other so that you can stay in this long-term effort.